So I think it's important for those of you that don't know to understand who FACT is. FACT is a premier standard-setting and accreditation body in cellular therapies and in cord blood banking. This is a definition from our mission statement. FACT is an organization comprised of practicing professionals encompassing all aspects of cellular therapy, and it is best positioned to set the standards and provide accreditation process that promotes quality patient care, improves treatment outcomes, and fosters continued development of the field. So these are our goals, really, to promote quality patient care, to improve treatment outcomes, but to do this in a way where the field can continue to develop and the standards and practices that are in place will not impede the research and development that's critical for progress. Excuse me, I think FACT has a unique place in cellular therapy because it emphasizes both the technical laboratory practices and the clinical use of cells and promotes quality patient care and valid research from both perspectives. And these areas of laboratory practice and clinical practice have always been at the core, married and part of FACT together. So FACT seeks to be dynamic in that it's really important to be flexible. When standards are set, when there are processes in place, there are many ways to meet the standard, and so FACT attempts to be as flexible as possible to meet not only the needs today, but as the field develops, to be able to address new issues that come up. The one thing that's really been critical to FACT success is the infrastructure of staff that's been built so that there is now a strong committee structure of professionals in the field, and they can work together and do more with the support of this educated and experienced staff that we have in our national office. FACT is responsive to things that come up in the field. It's try to always seek the opinions and needs of the cellular therapy professionals. FACT really is made up of the professionals, and the majority of participation is by professionals who are active in the field. And the FACT infrastructure is the smaller portion. FACT is responsive also by continuous improvement in standards and guidance. Another example is in the streamlined accreditation process that we've developed as a result of our online web-based application and accreditation system, and new customized educational opportunities for people at all levels of education. I think FACT is really aware of the potential of the new and evolving cellular therapies. We all started doing this kind of work when the main product was bone marrow, and so we see that there's been so much progress and so much change in the last few years that we're anxious to expand the scope of not only our standards but our accreditation to include newer therapeutic uses of cells and newer therapeutic products. So FACT is an independent organization and would not exist at all without our partners. We are an affiliate organization located at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, but our founding partners are the American Society for Blood and Marrow Transplantation, the clinical arm of the Transplant Society, and the International Society for Cellular Therapy, which are predominantly scientists and laboratory-based professionals in cell therapy. The ASBMT and ISCT together have formed the basis for the cellular therapy standards that we publish, and now in cooperation with JC, the Joint Accreditation Committee in Europe, this is an international document. So JC is completely an equal partner with FACT in the promulgation of the cellular therapy standards, and it runs a parallel, similar but independent accreditation for cell therapy programs in Europe For cord blood, which is more the topic of today, our main partner is NetCord. The International NetCord Foundation, which you may be familiar with, is a network of cord blood banks and cord blood banking experts. It's truly international, and it has as its goal, the reason for it to exist, to promote the highest quality in cord blood products, to balance the global supply and demand for cord blood units, and to encourage and facilitate the use of cord blood transplants by promoting laboratory and clinical research and by providing professional and public education. So, FACT and NetCord together are the equal partners in the FACT NetCord standards that relate to cord blood banking. So what services does FACT provide? First and foremost, FACT sets minimum standards for quality cellular therapy transplant programs and for cord blood banks. And these are two parallel and similar systems within our FACT organization, but they are separate documents, separate accreditation manuals, and separate standards documents. Based on these standards, then FACT accredits facilities. FACT educates the field about the requirements that we have. We educate our inspectors, and we educate applicants and potential applicants for accreditation about not only our requirements, but other cord blood banking principles and important issues that come up in not only banking, but transplantation. And finally, FACT is an advocate for the advancement of cord blood banking worldwide. Who manages FACT? It's the cord blood and cellular therapy banking experts that are in charge. The organization is run by a board of directors and the standing committees of the board. The activities that are performed are by the volunteers actively engaged in cellular therapy and cord blood banking. So all of the committees are staffed by professionals who have met certain criteria for numbers of years of participation in the field and experience in education. Personnel at accredited programs and banks are also populate the board and the standing committees. These are, it makes this process a peer-driven process. Nobody is an inspector who wasn't also inspected, and that I think brings a lot of collegiality and cross-education from inspector to applicant and from applicant to inspector. And it ensures that FACT initiatives and services will meet the needs of the cellular therapy and cord blood banking community. As I mentioned, we now have an excellent staff dedicated to assisting programs seeking accreditation. The accreditation division, as we call it, is technologists and scientists who are experienced in cellular therapy and in an interpretation of standards. And one of these people is assigned to every applicant who chooses to pursue FACT accreditation or to just become educated, become a participant, and that person will, that accreditation coordinator will assist that bank until such time as they've achieved their accreditation. So standards. The major goals of the standards are to promote quality practices in maternal and donor screening and cord blood collection, processing, testing, banking, selection, and release. The standards, importantly, are minimal standards. They're not best practices. And as such, there are many ways to meet the standard. There's not a practice that's the standard, but the standard is the guideline for attaining the goal. Standards apply to both related units and unrelated units, so this is public and private that we were just talking about. Obviously, some of the standards are not identical in those two settings, but the underlying purpose of a private unit is to have it be usable in the end. So there are standards that apply to all units that are collected. So the other goal of the standards is to consistently assure the provision of quality cord blood units for transplantation, and again, in the environment that protects research, development, and new products. The scope of the standards is related and unrelated cord blood units, and it includes all phases of the cord blood collection. So it's all the way from donor recruitment through screening, testing, collection, processing, testing, storage, listing, search, selection, reservation, release, and distribution of the units. And the actual infusion and administration of cord blood units is covered in the FACT JC cellular therapy standards, because those activities really require the cooperation of the clinical unit, without which the cord blood bank has a lot of difficulty in measuring the efficacy of the unit. The process for standards are developed by consensus. They're evidence-based wherever possible, and it's always astounding sometimes that the evidence is a little bit weaker than one might like to see. But when such published literature is not available, requirements are based on accepted scientific theory and expert consensus. The committee members of the Standards Committee, which we'll talk about in a minute, are all people active in the various professional roles in cord blood banking. The standards are revised every 3 years, and a simultaneously developed guidance manual is published. The purpose of the guidance manual is to explain the intent of the standard, to give some examples of how a bank might meet that standard, and emphasis on the fact that these are only examples, because there are many ways to meet the standard. And then finally, to give some guidance as to what an inspector might be looking for at the time of an inspection on site to demonstrate compliance with the standard. After a draft of standards is available, there is a period of public and professional review and comment. Every single comment is reviewed by the Standards Committee or a subcommittee of that group, and the comments are incorporated as they're appropriate. Sometimes, more often than not, they're very good comments, and leads to a much better document. Finally, the publication is a joint responsibility of FACT and NetCourt, so both boards will approve the document. The Standards Committee has international representation. Currently, we represent 10 different countries on our committee. These are all world-renowned experts who are active in the field. There are represent a variety of professional roles. There are clinicians, scientists, some more research-based, some more clinical-based. There are technologists, there are quality experts. They all represent accredited or applicant cord blood banks. Some are academic, some are in private, some are in public cord blood banks. And then, as sometimes happens, there needs to be additional expertise brought to the committee. Invited specialty experts are also included. And the committee also includes liaisons from regulatory bodies in several countries, from donor registries, and in other professional societies involved in cell therapy. The organization of the standards, I'm not going to go through all of this, but the main 2 points are: one, Part B, what's called cord blood bank operational standards, was also always intended to be a bigger overview kind of section, and the other sections to follow after, providing a lot more detail as to what one might expect in practice. And then the second point is the appendices, index, and contact information at the end. We've decided to take a lot of the references out of the document and provide a current website, so that if we want to reference other regulations or other publications, the people who are using the standards will be able to get the most current version easily. It'll also help us kind of keep up with how rapidly some of these things change. Accreditation. So it's fine to publish the standards. The accreditation is what demonstrates the compliance with standards. And we feel that the FACT accreditation is beneficial for a lot of reasons. It has a unique perspective of the cord blood banks that considers both medical and laboratory practice. And I think can't emphasize enough how important the clinical end is in all of these areas. FACT accreditation is used as a criterion by international clients seeking quality cord blood products. Accreditation facilitates establishment of quality management and process control, resulting in a larger inventory of quality units. So this is a huge benefit to the bank that's accredited. And international standards expand the market through requirements that are complementary and especially are important to import and export issues. So the accreditation program characteristics, it's voluntary. Cord blood banks choose to increase the quality of their processes for the benefit of their patients. Based on what I heard this morning, probably for the benefit of their own financial status as well. It's a peer-driven process. Inspectors are peers who volunteer to serve as inspectors, and they all say when they come back that they learn more when they inspect than when they are inspected. So it's a mutual benefit, and it's one of the big benefits of being an inspector is to be able to see some of the finest cord blood banks in the world and to learn from them and adopt some of those policies in your own bank. It's truly international and promotes access to matched donors and quality cell products worldwide. We have accredited cord blood banks in 15 countries, and that's rapidly expanding. The accreditation is based completely on the net cord FACT standards. The applicant demonstrates compliance with all standards. It means that there's control over each of the aspects of collection, banking, release of the units for administration. The accreditation includes all types of units managed by the cord blood bank. So if you are a hybrid bank or a bank that has both family donor units and unrelated units, both parts of the bank will be accredited. We found when that isn't so, advertising is very confusing and consumers don't know what they're looking at when they're looking at your cord blood bank. So we don't allow partial accreditation for one segment and not the other, nor do we have accreditation for only one aspect, such as only the laboratory. The accreditation is for the entire process of banking, and it's not divvied out by individual space. So eligibility requirements for accreditation, the bank has to have banked over 500 units prior to the inspection. They must be actively banking cord blood units, meet or exceed all of the current standards, and remembering that these are minimal requirements, not best practices, and there are many ways to achieve compliance. The language of the inspection, application standards and requirements are in English. There is a short list of specific documents that need to be translated if the bank does not practice primarily in English. The correspondence with the FACT office is in English, and every effort is made to assign inspectors fluent in the applicant's language. However, this isn't always possible, and so the bank, at the time of an on-site inspection, may be asked to provide an interpreter. This is the sort of timeline for accreditation. The initial application is a demographic application wherein you describe who you are, where you live, and what you do. Thereafter, you have 12 months to submit what we call the compliance application or your complete application, which means you're ready to be inspected. These are the sort of steps to the accreditation. First, you plan for it, you schedule it. We have no surprise inspections because we feel it's more important to be able to ensure that people that are critical to the inspection are present on the day of the inspection, and we don't want to travel some 1,000 miles to find nobody's there. The on-site inspection occurs after a fair amount of written material has been submitted. Each inspector prepares a report from the inspection, but the inspectors are the eyes and ears of FACT, and the reports are summarized and presented to an accreditation committee, which has a lot of continuity and oversight and reviews all of the reports and ensures that some consistency in interpretation. The bank is notified after that determination and given some time to respond to correct deficiencies or to change anything that needs to be improved in order to demonstrate compliance. And when those, so the important point to that is that the inspection is not a pass-fail event. It's a step on the process, and at the end of the inspection, you expect that you will have a few things to correct or many things to correct, and the goal is that to help everybody raise the level of quality so that every bank can be accredited. So it's a kind of a balancing act between the rigors of a comprehensive and thorough and regularly scheduled inspection versus a collegial kind of approach with trying to be helpful, trying to be colleagues and professionals in the field, and utilizing the dedicated support from the office staff to achieve the final goal of accreditation. So why is this successful? Can't underestimate the value of the staff and in their assistance to helping organizations. Another reason is the educational sessions that FACT has. Several in-person workshops a year occur to not only train the inspectors in inspection and in standards, but also to help applicants prepare for their accreditation and to meet one another and share experiences and help each other to also to become prepared. There are a number of online events. The Accreditation Manual, which is also revised every time there's a new edition of standards, has gotten to be about 3 times larger than it was with the first edition. So I think this is also helpful. It keeps it relevant and keeps on providing new things. And now our accreditation manual is online. It can be edited during the accreditation period so that as people come up with new ideas and new things that should be added that would be helpful, we can do that. So I just mentioned that we've begun an online process. So we think that we really want to make this an efficient process as well as being helpful. The online process on the FACT web system should reduce time zone and language barriers, printing and shipping costs, and the coordinators have been working really diligently so that they can assist you not only now in meeting standards, but in navigating your way through the FACT web. I just thought I'd give you a snapshot of the banks that FACT has accredited. There are 38 international cord blood banks that have been accredited, and as you can see from this demographic, in the US, we have 5 banks accredited who are doing unrelated donor banking only, 4 who are doing unrelated donor banking and family or private banking. So I guess the common language would be hybrid bank. Making a total of 9 US cord blood banks. In the non-US banks, there are 7 doing unrelated banking, 5 doing family banking only, and 17 doing both. So the family banking, private banking in the US has not kind of kept up with the international interest in family banking accreditation. Education, just briefly, in addition to the workshops that I mentioned, we are on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter. And we, by which I mean FACT, not so much me, although I'm getting better at Facebook. We also have webinars and tutorials, which are a slightly different emphasis, but they are both online events to help with ongoing publication. And there is a FACT newsletter, and they've given you a nice little access to that. Everyone is eligible to receive the FACT newsletter by just signing up, and it'll come to you in your email. This is what the website looks like, and you can see that there are resources for standards. There are general information about how to become accredited, how to become an inspector, and all the benefits that apply to that. And the FACT web is the accreditation portal that manages all the accreditation. Advocacy, just a couple of examples. FACT is an accrediting agency for the cord blood banks that are funded through HRSA. All the HRSA banks, all the banks have to have some kind of accreditation in order to receive this funding. We participate in the Advisory Council on Blood and Stem Cell Transplant. We also participate in the biannual FDA liaison meetings with the cellular therapy industry. Questions or assistance, this is how you reach us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Roberto, you get the first question.
Thank you for your talk. As you are well aware, there's a huge divide between public and private banks. Europe is a huge point of this kind of influence. In Brazil, to a great extent, is influenced by that. And the relevant agenda of quality and not quality and putting patients in the first place is forgotten. It's like religious, fanatic discussions go on. So I guess the blunt question would be, what prevents FACT of not merging with AABB, for example? Or in more diplomatic terms?
I'm pretty sure they didn't leave me enough time to adequately answer that question.
Or in more diplomatic terms, in collaborating more and bringing the quality discussion more up to the table as opposed to these fanatic discussions that are mostly irrational.
So FACT and ABB, I'll just...
Sorry for putting you on the spot.
No, well, it's a difficult question, and it's has some logic, so I won't... FACT and ABB have a lot in common, but they were born and raised, so to speak, in different cultures and in different environments. ABB came up from blood banking, mature blood cells, developed a lot of its processes, and adapted those policies and practices to the area of cellular therapies. ABB is trying to involve the clinical end. ABB is not a clinical organization. FACT, on the other hand, is very, very small, doesn't have the infrastructure of ABB, doesn't deal with the mature blood elements, but came from an environment of clinicians and laboratory people who were doing this work already, who wanted to make things better, and also who wanted to have some influence on what the regulations were that were in the middle of being developed. So we saw our goal as not so much preventing FDA from regulating the field, because FDA had already announced they were going to do this, and we wouldn't presume to be able to prevent that. But we definitely wanted to have an influence on what regulations got developed. I think we did, and when you read the preamble to some of our regulations, it describes how if you are already accredited in these voluntary systems, you will save time and money in meeting what federal regulations there are. So they're just very different, and we have liaisons, they have liaisons.
That's a question. It's an interesting question. It's a good question, but probably one that is beyond the scope of the time that Phyllis has here. So let's start with a couple. Yes.
Well, I think it's very important to comment because the model of ASBMT, ICT, and FACT can now be used going forward in regenerative medicine. So I'm speaking as a director of a clinical transplant program and having been involved in this for 20 years. Because ultimately, you want third-party payers, I'm speaking for the American market, to be paying for these therapeutics. So for the hematologists, we gathered 20 years ago and understood that we would need to educate our regulators. We would need to educate the FDA. So we formed ASBMT, ISCT, and FACT to accomplish that goal, and indeed, it did. Because if you look at the FDA regs for BLA, they are the FACT regs. So I think the aspect of cardiologists, neurologists, endocrinologists who will want to utilize cellular therapeutics in a therapeutic modality, this is the model to get third-party payment. So I think the subtlety that is brought forward, it really is very dramatic from the standpoint of third-party payers. You cannot charge for a cord blood transplant if you're not FACT accredited. So that to me, as a clinician, is the difference between FACT accreditation and AABB.
Okay,
Well, and I should say, we think it's extremely important to have the clinical standards and have a regenerative medicine task force that is going in that exact direction to involve clinicians.
Then I got to ask a follow-up question on that one, because there's an inconsistently from what Phyllis said and what I just heard from you. If the FACT accreditations are the BLA standards, and they are not the minimum standards, they are the best standards, because the FDA standards require current GTP and GMP, which are the highest level of standard. And so which is it? Is FACT?
Right, no, so it's not exactly what Mary said, but it's close. FACT has a standard that says you have to follow applicable law. And so if FDA comes along and says, okay, you now have a cord blood bank, you must be licensed, then by definition it becomes a FACT standard that you have to have a license.
Then in essence, FACT has different.
It's not that. The standards are different, and there are different standards for private banking than are for public banking. Mostly they don't involve, I mean, you won't find GMP in our standards at all, the words.
Okay. And does FACT have any plan to bring those standards up to a normative level where the public banking standards and the private banking standards are the same?
So in many regards, the public and private standards are the same.
I know, but
where they are different is primarily in the kind of unit you might accept. If it's a private unit, you'll accept a smaller one. You won't have a cutoff. You might accept it just a little bit later than you would an optimal public unit. The amount of testing that you do, you have to do some testing on a private unit, but the amount that you do and the level that you do it at, particularly for HLA and that sort of thing, is going to be less in a private setting. So that's the kind of difference that you'll find.
Okay. All right. Well,
sorry, I've just got one question. Thanks for your presentation, Phyllis. It was interesting you brought the point of there's a learning experience from the FACT assessor and the facility being assessed and finding some good practices and being able to share these. Is there anything in the FACT strategic goal to bring out a list of commendable practices so that the industry can actually learn from things that would have been recognised at a facility that they can adopt, and it's something that is a useful tool? AABB have a similar thing on their website.
Right, so two things. One, in the current edition of our guidance manual, there are examples, and some of these start to become that, good practices, which just says this is a way to meet the standard. You don't have to do it, but if you do, this is a really good way to do it. And the other thing is that FACT was formed as the standard setting and accrediting body of two professional organizations. So it's like if ISCT, ASBMT, and FACT were all one organization, then it would be FACT's responsibility more to publish commendable practices. When commendable practices come to be published, we tend to rely upon our colleagues, our partners, as the professional societies, the clinical society and the laboratory society, to take the lead in that publication, but we certainly work with them in that regard. So I think we need to look broader when you look for FACT practices.
Okay, thanks. Marie, you wanted to add the last word?
Question about AABB, and I think, so the standards and accreditation is one unit of AABB. We're a professional society, we're a nonprofit, or a 501c3. But we also have a unit in patient blood management, biovigilance, public policy, and education generally.
Well-
And it's organized as a matrix. So we're standards and accreditation, but we have much more that feeds in and informs our standards and accreditation. I think that's a major.
Okay, and I would commend all of you because this is obviously something that's on people's minds and is stirring some interesting questions. We're going to have some time at the lunch break to talk.